thank you for the opportunity. The movie is like very, very impressive. And then I want to ask you, I mean, because I mean, it has a lot of like very interesting and complex ideas, but at the same time, it's brutal, right? I mean, from the first scene, it goes to the jugular, to the throat. So, was that decided since I mean, when you were like writing, or was it decided before when you were discussing the story? How was the process of like deciding how intense the movie will be?
How intense?
Yeah, I mean, because it is, it's like it's
Oh,
heavy.
yeah. I mean, even without having discussed it, we would have known that it has to be intense, really. I mean, that's part of that world, really. Uh, and I don't think we discussed that. We discussed other things. Really, what we discussed was what would the world be like after 28 years, and how could we explore that?
So it makes sense that you have to be more violent, right? Because this thing has been happening for a while, so people, everything is getting worse.
I, I don't know about you, but I love to be able to put the brutal together with the beautiful. Sorry, with the brutal together with the beautiful is a wonderful dynamic, I think. And it's like innocence with horror, beauty, the landscape, something beautiful together with intense brutality. I love that mixture, and it's a wonderful way that you can expand horror, and it is expandable as a genre. It flexes and lets you occupy it with more beauty and more horror. It's got this absorption. It's a great vehicle for cinema, and it's one of the few things now apparently that's dependable, where people will prefer to see it in a cinema rather than watch it. You have that theory about watching them on your own. Horror films, you tend to kind of like, you don't really experience them on your own because you can turn them off, and um,
Yeah.
whereas in a cinema, there's a safety about watching it in a cinema with a group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally you were able to just like get this vision because it is a vision, like you were able to accomplish this vision, and the studio gave you like plenty of money to do something like this. So that's quite impressive too, right? Because I think it's a very creative movie that is not necessarily doesn't necessarily belong to the mainstream like scene, right? So that's quite interesting too, for me at least.
Yeah, they kind of they give you the money and then they regret it almost immediately. And you have to kind of like, but you have to plow on. And I think you have to hope that their instinct in trusting you with that offer, the financial offer, will prove true, because they'll often head for safety after that. But it's the fact that it's an original film, that although it's indebted to the first film, it's original in its own right, and it's ambitious. And certainly the film is ambitious, and the further films that come after it, the
Yeah,
trilogy, is a
yeah.
hugely ambitious undertaking that we are kind of two-thirds of the way through. Nia DaCosta shot the second one and is editing it at the moment,
Mm.
and we're hoping to shoot the third one if Sony will give us the money.
So you will direct, right, Danny? The third one. That's the idea.
If they'll give us the money, absolutely.
All right, right. That sounds very cool. There's a lot of like character development too. I mean, you mentioned that, right? That this movie is like has plenty of like beautiful moments in the middle of all these like brutal scenes. That's something different than the first one. But there's more like character development. The characters are completely into it. But there's one in particular that is like complete revelation, right? Alfie Williams, who portrays Spike. I mean, this is a kid that goes through like a lot of horrific experience. He has to survive. He has to fight. So that looks to me like a little bit risky in terms of American audiences that are more. They don't really like to see like kids in peril, right, in movies or whatever. But it was probably also like a huge challenge in terms of working with a kid, because there's some scale restrictions, and then also need to be very careful. I mean that, and he just plays it in such a realistic way that is like very moving. So did you decide since the beginning we were gonna have a kid as the main character, and how was working with him?
I think that it was. I mean, I don't know if exactly it was decided. It's just the story that was, arrived, had a kid at the heart of it. There's a funny thing that happens, which is filmmaking is like a process of thinking of something and then forgetting about all other considerations, and then thinking of something else and then forgetting about all other considerations. And so when you're writing a story, you don't think about, say, whether audiences will embrace a story involving a child or not. It just doesn't enter your mind. That's just the story that's being written. And then once it's there, you just go out there and say, well, Danny, do you want to make this? And then there's a studio wants to finance it, and is there a kid that's the right person to play it? And it's like a sequence of decisions with amnesia state between them. I think one of the things, Danny and I were discussing this earlier, that often interview questions assume more thinking and more strategy than really exists. It's a lot of it is impulse.
Yeah.
What grabs you, what doesn't grab you, instinct. And then later what you find is in an interview, you find some good reasons why these things exist, and you start attributing those reasons to them. But often it's, you're just looking at the product of instinct and compulsion, and not any thinking along those lines. I'll tell you what though, there are filmmakers who think along those lines, and you can tell their films a mile off, because you can tell how they're trying to manipulate you, and manipulate the studio, and manipulate the press, and manipulate the marketing. And I would say that this film is just not like that.
Yeah, and Alfie, it was finding him. We found him. You have to narrow that. It's counterintuitive. You think you would search everywhere for a child to take on a role this substantial. You can't do that, because there are millions of children you could interview. You could just take the next 10 years of your life interviewing them. By the time they've grown up by then, you have to narrow it down. So we looked in Newcastle only, which is where we were going to make the film. It's in the northeast of England, an industrial town in the northeast of England. That was where we were going to be based. And we found him. And I think that's, I don't know, it's serendipity. He's waiting for you in a weird kind of way. You just have to be open to him. It doesn't make rational sense, but that's the honest truth. And you find this boy, you interview 40 boys, and he's clearly the best out of it. And then you trust your instinct to go with him, rather than trying to kind of rationalize it, prove he's going to be worth it, screen test him, do lots of tests and tests and tests. At some point you have to go, no, this is the instinct. And when you get a lot of those instincts, like Alex is talking about, and they follow one another, they tumble forward, and they each, and when you have a good one, another good one will follow. And there's a kind of natural law that you keep falling forward with them, and you benefit each time from them. And he's a huge ingredient in the film that we benefited from.
And how was directing him? I mean, in terms of explaining him everything that was going on, because this is basically like, I at least I feel like he made this movie. This movie is plenty of things, right? But also like he's like a child of war, and like kind of a refugee. There's a lot in there, right? I mean, yeah. So how was talking to him and letting him know what this was supposed to be?
It was good. We shot it pretty much in narrative order, which helped, and will always help a child understand, I think, or somebody inexperienced in the business even. And he benefited from the kind of guardianship of Aaron Taylor Johnson, his father, who guided him through all the action sequences. And because Aaron's very experienced at that stuff, even though he's quite a young man himself still. But he kind of like, you saw the bond between Aaron and Alfie grow as the bond between Jamie and his son established itself on the screen. But then handing over to Jodie and his mother was a very different kind of education for him in a way, which again you witness, where she's teaching him something different in a way. I mean, there's lots of danger involved still for them, but he becomes a different person through her, and then through the completion of that journey through Ray Fiennes. And again, witnessing that, and it changed him as an actor. So you see him evolve throughout the film. I was quite amazed at that. And you have to have that because it's his film and he is stepping out at the end of it into another world, which we're going to meet in the second film.
Sure, sure, sure. And then you guys have said already that this is a very British movie, but considering everything that is going in the rest of the war, people will be like talking, about like parallels with different current situations. This is not civil war, but still, what do you think of this?
Well, there's a kind of horror is interesting because it has this transparency that you can see other things in it. Whether sometimes they're intentional, sometimes they're not, because when you make the movie, something hasn't happened. And by the time the movie comes out, something has, and people read that into it. And that's a good thing. I think it's sort of one of the advantages of horror in a way, is that you can lay over it, like almost like a kind of like a matrix. You can lay over it other issues that are happening in the world, and they seem to, the film seems to speak to them in some ways. So we have our own example of that with Brexit, for instance, which is an isolation the country has chosen politically. The isolation that is in the story that's been enforced on these people, but you can't help but imagine that in some way it reflects on what it is to be a society that looks backwards now, and Brexit is a backward-looking idea. It's kind of thinking England was great before we got involved with the Europeans, and now we can be great again. And so the community on the island has that regressive nature about them, and they want Spike, the Alfie Williams character, to follow in those footsteps, and he chooses not to, which is a positive thing by the end of the film, I think.
At least for me, it was like probably more terrifying than it would have been in the past. I mean, I was watching it yesterday with everything that's going on. I was really like kind of scared for real. I mean, there's some extra layers here to everything that is going on, and that's good because it shows that you guys as filmmakers are like in touch with reality, even when you're making like a horror movie, right? So that's pretty cool.
Well, we hope so, and we hope people connect with it and read it in that way. But it's the journey that you want people to join you on the journey, and the excitement of the journey is, invigorates them, really. Makes you feel like, you go to the cinema. The other thing about horror is that it's a communal experience, best enjoyed communally, which is why horror still gets people to go to the cinema. It's one of the few genres, I think, that it feels dependable, that you will go to the cinema to watch it. It's almost like better than watching them at home. To see them in a crowd of people. Anyway, we hope there's a big crowd of people when this opens in Mexico.
Oh, it will be. So I would like to talk a little bit about the special effects and the infected and everything, because they're not zombies, they're infected. So how was that? You mentioned about like the movie has a lot of like experimental stuff in visual terms and everything, but referring the physical appearance of the creatures, of the infected, did you try to, were you like willing to use a lot of like the new technologies in terms of like, I don't know, special effects? So how was it a combination? How was it? Because of course you shot the whole movie in iPhones, but then regarding specifically the look of the infected, how was it work?
It was done by an amazing guy called John Nolan, a prosthetics guy, who built, so the infected, we first see a group of them which have evolved as ground creatures, really, moving, using less energy and finding the nutrients they need amongst worms and berries and slugs on the ground. And they're more passive, and they've saved energy through that. But they're very dangerous if they're provoked. And they were built by our prosthetics guy, but that's all real prosthetics. It's not CG at all. And the infected themselves, the kind of the group that you recognize, really, because they feel like they're connected with the first film, they have evolved because they're hunting now. And to hunt without weapons, you have to work as a group, as a pack. So they've become more organized than in the first film, where they were much more random. And out of that has emerged the third type, the third variant, if you like, which is the alpha, the leader. And there are two that you see in the film. And again, that's a prosthetic embellishment of very big guys, a couple of very tall guys. One's a kind of basketball player and one's an MMA fighter. So Chai Lewis Parry, who's an amazing actor as well. So that's the way that we did it. And they also did the pregnancy scene, which is a kind of final variant, I suppose, in how the virus evolves and maintains itself, really, that sex is clearly happening in somewhere in some way, and the product of that is this baby. Yeah.
All right, guys, thank you very much. This is extremely powerful movie, and thank you for your job. I mean, we're so glad to have you back and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.